there's some still not aware of what God is. God is perfect freedom, justice, equality, and thus the only thing that brings perfect justice, freedom, and equality, perfect love in all of its beauty and holiness is socialism. So far, that's
918 people. Until the attacks on the Twin Towers on 9/11, 918 people was the highest amount of American civilian lives lost in a single deliberate event. This event is known as the Jonestown Massacre, which, as the name suggests, took place in Jonestown, Guyana on November 18, 1978. Jim Jones, the creator of the cult, is largely, if not entirely, held responsible for the massacre, despite it not being a massacre in the typical sense. His actions as a leader changed the lives of countless Americans and have been continuously emulated by the cult leaders in the years to follow. Jonestown was built by the People's Temple, an offshoot of Christianity that morphed many Christian beliefs with Marxist political ideologies. This religion ironically denounced organized religion for unevenly distributing power, although it itself subtly took power from the mass of the patrons and allowed various higher-ranking officials to make executive decisions for the entirety of the church. Jim Jones was the creator and leader of the People's Temple, which he founded in Indiana in 1955. Jones came from a rough family with an abusive and alcoholic father and extremely religious mother. Jones was eventually appointed the director of Indiana's Human Rights Commission and integrated not only his churches but other businesses and social settings as well. Jim Jones later moved the church from Indiana to California in 1963 under the premise that it was safer from Jones's predicted nuclear holocaust, which would take place on July of 1967, in which socialists would eventually rule the earth. As the People's Temple taught socialist ideology and many of the patrons were very devout, a relatively large group of members followed Jones in his migration from Indianapolis to Redwood Valley, California. While in San Francisco, Jim Jones and the People's Temple assisted in the successful election of the mayor, George Moscone, by providing a crucial 2,000 votes, which swung the election in Moscone's favor. Through his collaboration, Jim Jones gained political power and eventually had members of the People's Temple assume positions in the government. This allowed Jones to call in political favors and allowed him to get various permits to aid in the expansion of the church, both geographically, through adding more places of worship, as well as socially, through protest against less progressive groups and ideals. As the People's Temple became more and more ideologically polar, so too did its constituents. It became customary for Jones to punish members for being unfaithful to the church. Punishments ranged from public humiliation to group beatings. After several of these events occurred, loved ones of members began to contact the press and authorities. Allegations of Jones sexually abusing members of the church began to surface. As people started to come forward, more and more attention was drawn to the church. A series of articles by Lester Kinselman detailing not only the defection of several members from the People's Temple, but also their inner workings and methods of punishment. The church's existence was on the line. Around this time, Jones took an extended vacation to Brazil. He returned with an idea of a utopia, one completely self-sufficient and entirely isolated from society, aside from for basic communication and to make a profit. It would be based entirely on communist ideologies and be named after its charismatic leader. It would be called Jonestown. Jonestown construction broke ground in 1974 on 3,800 acres of land in northwestern Guyana. Guyana was an ideal location for the People's Temple. The country had socialist views, was isolated, and predominantly comprised of native people, which would allow the African American members of the church a more accepting and peaceful place to live. 500 people initially moved to Guyana to construct the compound. By 1976, several hundred people had begun to live in Jonestown. It started out beautifully. Everyone was healthy, happy, and content with their lives. Everyone coexisted with one another. But then, Jones got sick.